You know what? It's a famine of beauty. It's a famine of beauty. It's a famine of beauty, honey. My eyes are starving for beauty.
One of the most enchanting things about fashion is that new is forever in style. But as fashion cycle through and lose their flavor, the industry seems to be increasingly embracing ugliness. We all know high-end designers and luxury brands set the scene, and they're not just deciding for the runways.
What you don't know is that sweater is not just blue, it's not turquoise, it's not lapis, it's actually cerulean.
But as their clothes get uglier, so do ours, because they're constructed poorly with cheap materials. And this is why our wardrobes are so filled with ugly clothing. It is incredibly difficult to find good quality clothing that is truly beautiful. You really have to look for it, and as most of us don't have the time, we reach for items that we know are subpar but will do for now. This is an epidemic. A quick caveat. I want to make it clear that although this video is informed by a few articles, linked in the description, most of this is entirely my own opinion. I have only participated in the industry as a consumer and have no idea what's actually going on the inside. However, I'm making this video because an outsider's perspective can be valuable, and I'm hoping this helps a few other curious people think a little differently about how the industry operates and why it operates that way. We are biological creatures who are programmed to want a healthy body and an abundant environment in which to thrive. To us, this is beauty, and we want to be surrounded with this kind of beauty. This same understanding and appreciation of beauty exists across the animal kingdom. We can see that in the peacock's feathers, or in the way this Japanese pufferfish creates mandala-like structures in the sand. Ugliness plays into this intuition. It is a violation, intentional or not, of this natural world. Colors that signify illness, along with proportions that suggest disease or disfigurement, all constitute this ugly aesthetic. Ugly is instinctively disconcerting. I don't think the problem is inherent in the ugly fashion itself, because I think ugly fashion can be beautiful. And usually this is the case when it illustrates the beauty in the ugly or the hope in the despair. Truly great designers and artists know how to elevate the soul, even when they're taking you to the depths of hell. However, this doesn't change the fact that most of the ugly fashion that's being churned out by the industry is genuinely just ugly. So why is the industry doing this to us? To the average person, fashion can seem vacuous. Indeed, the industry is often accused of being shallow, fickle, and stupid. I almost wonder if ugliness was adopted in response to this to try to portray some kind of depth of thought or artistic integrity in an attempt to justify its existence. A good indicator if something is art, at least in my somewhat uneducated opinion, is that it evokes some kind of emotion in the viewer. Where we live in a world of constant stimulus, perhaps we are so overwhelmed that the only way to really garner attention and earn the desired label of art is to elicit negative emotion. We are programmed to pay closer attention to negative emotion because it usually indicates some threat to our survival. Ugly fashion is a really easy way for designers to make a meaningful statement. These clothes are then seemingly more insightful and profound, elevating the collection in the minds of the media and consumers. You are buying into what the collection and the brand stand for rather than buying the clothes themselves. So in that way, you're actually really purchasing concepts. And provided you have the cash, it's an easy way to portray yourself as someone who gets the message and art. This makes me think about that quote from Midnight in Paris when Gertrude Stein is in her salon. And she says,
"The artist's job is not to succumb to despair, but to find an antidote for the emptiness of existence."
And I think this is an element that's largely absent from ugly fashion and from modern art more generally. It wallows in nihilism, insisting that it's delivering an original and challenging message when really it's easy to be nihilistic. It's far more difficult to find the positivity in the suffering that can and does feature in our lives at different times. Ugly fashion is also seen as more authentic and real, where beautiful fashion is seen as perfection, a denial of the entropy that characterizes all of our lives. Ugly fashion proudly displays the imperfections that are usually hidden and revels in the entropy. And this is certainly a type of honesty which is a major tenet of authenticity. I think ugliness is definitely valid. The problem I have is when ugliness dominates, and in doing so, it denies the beauty that is inherent in all of us and our lives. Lives, not lies. It focuses too much on the ugliness and almost lies by omission. And in my mind, that's inauthentic because it doesn't portray things as they really are. The fashion industry, particularly luxury fashion brands and the trendy consumers, use ugly fashion as a way to give a finger to the establishment, which for large luxury fashion houses is kind of ironic because they are the establishment. It kind of makes it clear that this is about business, and perhaps it contributes to the clamoring for the appearance of authenticity through ugly fashion. These brands are very well aware that they could be pegged as the establishment in an industry that is largely concerned with exclusivity, creativity, and freedom of self-expression, all of which stand in direct opposition to what the establishment represents, and could spell the end of these brands. Ugly fashion is something that only people within the fashion industry really understand. It's something the industry revels in, exclusivity, and it's something that luxury fashion brands absolutely adore and work very hard to maintain. Fashion is a way to differentiate yourself. It's something that differentiates you, a person with money, from others, the penniless plebs. But it's not simply the price tag of luxury fashion that contributes to its exclusivity. Ugly fashion is really difficult to pull off. If you are less conventionally attractive or are older, this ugly fashion is less likely to look ironic and more like you don't know what you're doing or don't know how to dress yourself. This is not fashion that is accessible if you're not young and conventionally attractive, or if you're not wealthy enough to transform your appearance accordingly. So there's extra status in wearing ugly clothing and looking good while doing it. The issue becomes even more interesting when we consider that luxury fashion brands set the scene for the upcoming trends, and that fast fashion houses know these trends will sell, so that is what they sell. And the everyday person will buy their clothes from fast fashion retailers, as much as we wish that wasn't the case. And I think here is why we see the average person is less interested in fashion or less concerned with how they dress as compared to previous decades. As I mentioned, the fast fashion equivalents of these ugly fashion trends are truly hideous. Everyday people want something that is flattering. We want something that's going to make us look good. And this ugly fashion stands in direct contrast to what we want. And when you Google why is modern fashion, you get a pretty clear picture of the confusion, frustration, and apathy that most people feel towards fashion these days. It makes sense why people feel they can no longer understand or relate to fashion anymore, let alone participate in it. We've been locked out. The fashion industry is completely saturated with brands, media, and consumers all looking to stand out and make an impact. For fashion houses, standing out in a way that appeals to consumers is everything. And their consumers are people with amazing amounts of money who can afford to buy literally whatever they want. They would have seen it all and have a lot of brands competing for their attention and money. So naturally, to stand out, you need that shock value. Furthermore, fashion influencers and amateur journalists need an it factor to remain relevant in an increasingly competitive market. How do you stand out and stay relevant? You too indulge in the ugliest fashion. Media is also looking for the most outrageous content to serve up to consumers, as they also compete with those fashion influencers and amateur journalists that only ever seem to keep cropping up in ever greater numbers. I'm very conscious of the fact that I am one of those people. They provide a roundup of the most ridiculous fashions to encourage viewership, which further encourages brands to create ugly fashion as they vie for covers. For covership? Be covered? As they vie to be covered. Ultimately, competitiveness then translates into profits, and large luxury fashion houses absolutely love profits. But as seasons shrink and businesses forever look to grow their profits, the resultant time and financial pressures that come from corporate executives leads naturally to less emphasis on creativity. I almost wonder if this has meant that designers have had to sacrifice beauty, as creating something beautiful is extremely difficult and requires a lot of consideration, creativity, and time, i.e. a lot of money. Editing Lily here. So what I meant to say was that it's difficult to create something that's beautiful and also novel. It's quite easy to create something that's beautiful, but a lot of that has been done before. And as Anna Wintour says, fashion is about looking forwards. It never lives in the past. So that doesn't really give you much option but to create something that's ugly. Creating something ugly is far easier and also creates that shock value that demands attention from media and consumers, resulting in publicity and sales. The bid for profits may also be why we see these labels slap their branding all over their products, because these businesses have shored up the market by making sure that it's not about the product itself. It is just the name. So it doesn't really matter what products they're releasing. You'll buy it because it has the label on it. The status is more important. We are not powerless as consumers. We actually do have a choice. Fortuitously, I came across this really great fashion YouTuber just yesterday who released a video 2 weeks ago talking pretty much about this topic, but from the other side of things. So talking about what we can do about this problem. And I've linked that video below. His name is Fashion Lover 4. And he's a really interesting dude. His solution is more systemic. So some more individual solutions are things like focusing on buying older pieces, so whether that's vintage or secondhand, buying from smaller designers on platforms such as Etsy, and learning to make your own clothing. All of which mostly removes the influence of the fashion industry and also reduces support for the industry as it is. I cover this in some of my other videos, and we'll also talk a little bit about this in future videos too, so stay tuned. I would genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this topic because it's so complex. I'm sure that I've missed something. It would also be interesting to hear what you think we could do about this. On a personal level, comments mean a lot to me because I really love to know who's on the other end of this conversation, and I've genuinely enjoyed talking with you guys on my channel so far, so I really look forward to our future conversations. Please leave me a comment. Until next time, I wish you all the very best in dress. Goodbye.